Welcome to tonight's shiur, Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Mishpotim, Shkolim. Tonight's shiur is sponsored by Rav Remy Kievman, Shliach in Liverpool, in honor of the yahrzeit of his late father, Baruch Kievman, who was a short while that he actually lived in England, was a Malamed here in the schools for a little while. Just, afterwards, he lived in Crown Heights. He's Yichrei Baruch. And thank you, Rabbi Kievman, for your coming forward. We're always available, unless there's a sponsor already. Okay, so we're going to start off with a Maisa. I'm going to connect it with the first of our list of questions about Shnayim Mikro. And this is from the Rebbe's Rishimus. And this is from Chof Zayin Marcheshvin Tofresh Tzadik Beis. And the Frierdiker Rebbe describes how he, on occasion, it was a Parshas Vayera and Chayesoro, where he heard his father being Mavasedre, and from this he became a Baal Tshuva. That's the earlier part. Now this you have here, he says, when you heard him be Mavasedre, he was like a person who's totally ish ponu legamri, like a person who's got nothing else to worry about from any business, no pressure. He was totally engrossed or totally involved in Mavasedra without, as if he had no other care in the world. Sometimes he would finish off on Shabbos because he would have to pause the Mavasedra, which he started on Friday. But he wouldn't. He had to take a break, and he would finish off on Shabbos, but not in the middle of a parsha. Sometimes he would start even on Thursday and finish on Shabbos. Why did he have to take pauses? At Nidgat Kayach, his Mavasedra was with such energy that he got drained of energy, and he had to take a pause. And that was that Parshas Vayera, where he saw how his father was so into the Mavasedra, and he says one last description. He was Mavasedra, he wasn't wearing his gartel, he wasn't wearing his koiva ogel, which is another word, a round hat, otherwise the streimel, nor was he wearing the big day meshin, nor was he wearing the silk bekesha, etc. on ogish pilot, and his jacket was unbuttoned, so he looked quite relaxed in that way. So it didn't look intense, but his focus on his Mavasedra was total. As I was thinking of this story, last year around this time I was in Eretz Yisrael, and I went to visit my cousin. Was it last year, 2 years ago, whatever, and 2 years ago, and it's a Friday afternoon, and he's sitting being Mavasedra, sitting on the couch being Mavasedra. He told me that he went in Yechidus, Tafshin Lamed Dal. It wasn't his bar mitzvah. He's a few years older than me. And in the Yechidus, his birthday was on a Friday. And the Rebbe said, "Mistama v'esta zorgen Shnayim Mikro fash Kabbalah Shabbos." That presumably you'll do my Shnayim Mikro, you'll do Mavasedra before Kabbalah Shabbos. And he said that were several Bochrim at the same time, that period that the Rebbe, not as if they asked anything, the Rebbe reminded them of the inyan of being Mavasedra and before Shabbos. So going on to, we had this discussion of late when you got three Haftoros or four Haftoros coming together. There's one of Parshas HaShavua, let's say Shabbos Chodesh Chanukah. So you've got Parshas Miketz, and then you've got the one for Chanukah, which is going to be read. But what about the Rosh Chodesh one? And if it's also Erev Rosh Chodesh, you got two. You got Shach HaShamayim Kisi and Mocher Chodesh, and we came up with a theory that you'd only read the Haftoros, either the one of the Pasedra or the one of which is actually going to be in Shul. So now this week, as I was looking over the Sikha every week, Lahak Hanochas Belahak published a Sikha. This is from Shabbos Mishpotim, Tov Lamed Zayin, where it was Shabbos Mishpotim, and it was Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and it was Shabbos Shkolim. And the Rebbe talks about that, taking out 3 Sefer Torah, and really, perhaps you should do 3 Haftoros. But all right, but you only do you do only 1 Haftorah. Afal Pikein, the minig Haftorah is the Haftorah, which is of the 3, is Pasha Skolim. However, you do, as known the Hero of Rabbeinu Sein and the Sieno, that by Mavis Sedre, one would say Kol Gimel Haftoros. And therefore, with their moving, Shemichad Yisrael, there's 3 inyonim. That's why by Yochid you say all 3 Haftorahs. Lidor Yisa, there's and the Rebbe talks about the connection with the 3 Haftorahs. Okay. So meanwhile here he says that you should say all 3 Haftorahs. So this is contradicting what I'd said, the theory which I'd said, that the ones which are neither going to be read in Shul nor Pashas Shavua, that you don't have to do them. So I mentioned this to someone, and he said, well, actually look in the Yiddish, because this is published now in Hanochas B'Lahak, but at the time, the Hanochas were published in Yiddish, and they've translated them into Hebrew. This is a Shabbos Verbringen, so they don't have a recording. So let's read the Yiddish. Es ist da, ist das 3 besondere Unionen. Hier du der Rov of Anash, al-Bashas, he refers to, well, the Maniach refers to Hayem Yom. Al-Bashas mit Mavis Sedre, the Sedre, Shnayim Mikro, soll man sagen alle Haftoros. He doesn't say alle 3 Haftoros, he just says alle Haftoros. So we're still a little bit not totally clear, but even when you say alle Haftoros, also all the Haftoros, it seems to be all the possible Haftoros. So, right, let's go on. And since we're in the Rebbe's capital is Kuf Chof Daled, so several people, 3 or 4 people, 3 people have asked me about Pach Nishbar and Pach Nishbor, where there's a difference in the way it is in the Tehillim, it's Nishbor, and in the Siddur, it's a Pach Nishbar. I think it's that way. I'm just going to pull out the Tehillim, check. So now, one of the people who was in conversation with me said perhaps our Tehillim is not so meduyuk or something. So before we start playing around with Yom Meduyuk, Nush Meduyuk, I wanted to recall that there's a Geman originally from London. His name is Shmuley Rabin, who was brilliant in Dikduk, amongst other things. And around Tov Nun Aleph, may have been still a bocher, but he had written into the Rebbe about the Tehillim, that's the Chabad Tehillim Yosef Yitzchok, and how, according to the Medaktikim, there's lots of discrepancies there, or if that's whatever word he uses. And so the Rebbe's response to him, that's why I heard at the time, was wissen Sie wegen Dikduk? Not what do you know about Dikduk, but what do those, you're saying the master Medaktikim have issues with the way it's presented in that Tehillim. Was wissen Sie wegen Dikduk? Interesting. It just reminds me, I just followed a conversation about the exchange of water when you have Beir al Gabe Beir, where someone had written to the Rebbe that according to some scientists, the lower water and the upper water exchange. And so the Rebbe's response, I'm not going to go into the whole thing now, but the Rebbe says, go find another scientist. And so there's an Ingeman in Eretz Yisrael called Rav Shol Silam in somewhere in Yerushalayim. So he has he's trained, he's from France, he's trained in physics, whatever. And he actually, by the Siyam Rambam, now in Yerushalayim, he told over, he made contact with a physicist or whatever that who breathes water. This is a whole chayis is water. And he was quite confident that it's okay to say that the upper waters and lower waters are not mixing. But that's for another whole discussion. But this kind of was in physics, yeah. So now, looking at the Tehillim. So we have in the Tehillim it says Hapach Nishbor, in the Siddur it says Hapach Nishbar. So what we have on the screen, we have here from an early Tehillim, well, relatively early, from about 300 years ago. Tov Ayin Zayin. That's in the back of the Seuda Shlishis, printed in Amsterdam, Tov Ayin Zayin. And there it has with a comments. Here you have another also. This is a tribute. This lower one, the next one on the screen, is attributed to Reb Saadia Gaon or something. And here has also the comments. Then we have another Tehillim, which is also a Sephardic print. Bear in mind, but for the Sephardim, Nishbor and Nishbar is all the same thing. So the dikduk on that point is not such an issue. But yeah, but here he has a Pach Nishbar. But then he doesn't stop with that. He also has a note at the bottom. B'mix hasforim habeis bepasach, b'mixoson komets, b'ha'oilom noyagin lekroise bepatach. So it's the common reading is patach. Just to support that, now I have a Tehillim with the Pirush of Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the Hirsch Tehillim, which is, knowing Yekes, I think it's an accurate edition. And there's also Hapach Nishbar with a patach. So if someone starts telling you it's not a meduyuk, well, we've got some history here that it is. There's good reason to say it's meduyuk. But I want to go a little bit more scientific on this, and that is looking at the trop. Now, in Hebrew, we've got the word shomayim. At the end of a pasuk, it becomes shomoyim. Eretz becomes oretz, and so on. There are many words which the vowel will change when it's at an end of sentence, and also sometimes at asnachto, which is a strong pause. Now, the trop, the tunes of most of Tanakh are the same set of tunes. And then you've got, for the three Sforim of Eiv, Mishle, Tehillim, they've got a different set of notes, and they've got different names. And so, all right, it's not by our community, the trop for Tehillim. I don't know many people who know how to read them, but we have them by Sephardim. They are more knowledgeable about the trop for Tehillim. But meanwhile, you've got a series of trop in Tehillim. The trop on the word Nishbor or Nishbar is called Mugrosh Legarme. Now, you've got that, it looks like Aslo Geiresh, and then you've got a Revi. This is called Mugrosh Legarme, which I have a sefer dedicated to the trop of Tanakh, and he has a chart of different levels. Now, in English, we've got a sentence. You've got the end of sentence is a full stop. Halfway through the sentence, you may, if there's a strong pause, you might put in a colon. And then you might have commas here and there to break the sentence, to put a pause in the sentence. A comma and a semicolon have not the same level of a pause. Similarly, lahavdil, in Tanakh, in the Shnayim Mikro, you've got mafsikim, which are stronger, and you've got weaker, smaller mafsikim, lesser mafsikim. So obviously the safe pasuk is the strongest one. So like this word nimlotnu, probably in the middle of a word, in the middle of a sentence, it might be nimlotnu, but it's end of a sentence. The asnachto is the second strongest pause. Middle of a sentence, it breaks the sentence into half. That's the asnachto. Then we've got lesser mafsikim, like a zokiv koton in Mikro, in Chumash, and this term of what I called it, Mugrish Legarme, is put on the same level as a zokiv koton. So does that degree of pause change from a patach to a komets? That's really the discussion. Does the fact that it's on it is a slight pause. Hapach Nishbar is a slight pause. Does that change, or is it seen as middle of a sentence? Therefore, it be Hapach Nishbar. That is really the debate. How strong is this pause, and whether therefore it changes it from a patach to komets? So that is the machloikas, so to speak, the chilukei deis, how we see that. Now, in the way I am comfortable to read, yes, you read the pasuk. That's like asnachto. I don't see much of a pause there. But there is this drop of a pause. As I was doing Tehillim this morning, I saw a similar structure, as you see in chapter Pei Beis in Tehillim, Ki ato sinchal b'chol hagoyim. Now, if it's the end of a pasuk, be'artzom lois, or even by a pause, be'artzom lois sinchol, v'chelek lo yeh b'choy b'seicham, ani chelka v'nachal. Yeah. So if it be as a pause, it be ato sinchol. So if it's meant to be hapach nishbor, it should be also ki ato sinchol. Novos. It's the middle of the middle of a sentence. It's not a pause. Ato sinchal b'chol hagoyim. All right. So hapach nishbor v'nachni nimlot is slightly more of a pause because there's only one drop afterwards. Here there's a tipcha afterwards. It's debatable. But I just wanted to share with you a little bit more. It's not just, this printer decided this way, this one. There's a little bit more to it, that whether it should be seen as a stronger pause or as a lesser pause, and therefore, how do you do lemaisa? Oh, this is what you want. Well, lemaisa, what you had to do. Lemaisa, you do what's written in the print in front of you. You have a siddur, it says hapach nishbar, you say the way it says in the siddur. It's not the time when you're davening, it's not the time to start making pulpulim with all these things. You just follow what the siddur is, and hopefully they got it right. Right, let's move on. So now we're going to go on to the next question, number 3, and that is, what is the value of a Prutah? So we're preparing for Purim, and we're going to perhaps to make kits for people to do the mitzvahs of Purim, and some want to put in a few coins. So what is the minimum for a Prutah, assuming that's not so clear that Matonos loEvyonim, a Prutah is enough? Some say it should be the shiur of a Seuda, which is more than a Prutah. But assuming that it's a Prutah, how much is a Prutah? Now, for those who engage in pidyon haben, one side or the other side of the table, silver has shot up recently. And a pidyon haben, which last time, a couple of years ago, it looked like to me it was about £60 for 100 grams of silver. Now 100 grams of silver is approximately £200, which means, so I can see the Kohen smiling. That's how much is a shiur? Also, 1 gram of silver is approximately £1. It went a bit more than £1 last week, went to 2.15, then it went down to 1.87, but it's fluctuating around £2. So now Reb Chaim Noah says that the shiur of a Prutah, which actually we're learning Gemara Kedushin at the moment, so Isha Miskadeshes with Prutah v'Shav Prutah. The shiur of a Prutah is the value of silver of half a barley grain. But so Chaim Noah says it's 1/40th of a gram. The silver 1/40th of a gram. So if a gram of silver is now cost £2, so 1/40th is about 5 pence. So therefore, in the current moment, about a 5 pence coin is about a Prutah. And if people are listening in other countries, you work it out in your country. Whatever the exchange rate is, find out how much is a gram of silver, and in your currency, in your local price, and then divide that by 40, and that will be the shiur Prutah. Right, let's move on. A fine lady contacted me and asked me, she has an oven with a Shabbos mode, and she wanted to know, could she put in raw chicken before Shabbos in a covered dish, and then somehow it will switch on Shabbos mode, and it will cook. It will be ready for Shabbos day. So I must say that generally this idea of having food warming up on Shabbos with a time switch, whilst there may be halacha room for it, Rav Padva Zichrono Livracha was actually quite opposed to it. He did not allow the caterers. The caterers would love to be able to have their kugel hot and crisp. This is as atziruf, caramel. This is rach and mole and geschmack, and that's good for the caterers. We get better get their feedback. But if you leave the kugel on the thing before Shabbos, so then it's something's going to dry out. So it's a ganze kunst to get the kugel. It should be hot and not dry. So they would love to be able to use a time switch. And the Shabbos morning, the cold kugel will become warm, and by the time kigel time for Kiddush, it's all nice and hot and geschmack. But Rav Pavli didn't allow it. He didn't allow the caterers to do this. He saw it's asking for trouble. Okay, fine. But that's one thing. So generally, when people ask, can I use a timer to switch on Shabbos, it's not so poshut. And there may also be bases loHalocho, looking, I think, in Shin Chav Hey, the Marshal, which is brought in Alter Rebbe also. There's one thing if a melacha started before Shabbos and continues into Shabbos. There's another thing if a melacha starts on Shabbos. It's a different halacha. Okay. But meanwhile, she tells me that she has this oven. So the first thing is, if you want to leave raw food to cook on Shabbos, there's a din. It has to be either guruf or ketuma. So you've got to leave it in the oven. How is the inside of the oven going to be guruf or ketuma? So she tells me, she got back to me, she says, in other words, well, how do we do ketuma? We do a blech, you cover the fire. But inside an oven, it's not really practical to cover the fire. So how are you going to make a change from the regular way of baking? So she comes back, she says, it's got a matzav Shabbos. It's got a Shabbos switch, Shabbos mode. The Shabbos mode, she was saying, doesn't allow you to do adjustments. So if the reason that the ketuma is that you shouldn't come to adjust the flame, so this button, Shabbos mode, is the same thing. So all right, I was a little bit convinced. Then someone brought it to my attention. No, wait a minute. You're saying this. One button, you might come to adjust the button. Oh, so you got now two buttons. You have to depress the Shabbos mode, and then you can start rotating the controls. So who says that's good enough? Here's another very important point. When it comes to blech, so the halacha requires you cover the heat, the source of heat. If you just cover the buttons and not cover the source of heat, that wouldn't be enough. Rav Moshe Feinstein says you should cover the buttons. Gesundheit. But going back, why do we put a blech? Because in the olden times, you had an oven, a kiro, and it stayed there every 5 minutes. You had to poke with a poker. So they had to put a reminder, don't poke. So you had the controls, that's the poker, or where you can poke. And so you have to put a reminder by the way where you put your poker. Now you've got the fire is here, and the poker, the controls is over there. So now, do you have to cover the controls, or do you have to cover the fire? Now, in other words, before the two were together, the fire and the controls of the fire was in the same place. With electric stove, you have the fire here and the controls over there. So is it enough to cover the controls? This is the question. So the wisdom of Heller and of forecast is no. The halacha requires that you cover the fire. The halacha requires that you cover the fire. And therefore, the fact that you've covered the controls, that's not good enough. It's a nice thing, but it doesn't help. So even if it would be, and this is what you have on the screen from Rav Forkash Yosef Shabbos Halocho. He talks about this Matzav Shabbat, and that the Shabbos Halocho seems to have been permitting this. And he says it's not really, he's not happy with that, because it's not. You can't compare the Matzav Shabbat to a hot plate, because there the actual fire is not the way it is during the week, not the way the cooking mode. Whereas here you're just covering a button, which is a side thing. All right, so find another way to get your fresh chicken for Shabbos lunch. Okay, so here's another question not on the screen. How many minutes after sunset could I wash for Seuda Shlishis? Now, once it becomes Shabbos, we're not allowed to eat without Kiddush, because, all right, out of covered for Kiddush. Once it becomes Havdalah time, you're not allowed to eat before making Havdalah. But when does Havdalah time arrive? Is Havdalah time sunset, or is Havdalah time 3 stars? So there's two opinions in Shulchan Aruch. One says until Tzeiser Kachovim you can still eat, but the halacha remains like the stricter opinion that after Shkia you shouldn't eat. Go into any Polish shtibel and check out what time do they start their Shalashudis. I was once in Golders Green for a Shabbos, and a friend of mine, not Lubavitcher, so he had a shtibel there. I was surprised, like a half an hour after Shki, he came in and made hamotzi. It was like, all right, so they're relying on Rabbeinu Tam, this, that. But we don't follow Rabbeinu Tam in this respect. For tefillin, yes, for Shkia, not. So for us, Shkia is, well, after Shkia, we can't start our meal. We can't start washing, having hamotzi. But there's a little bit of flexibility here. And I told this person that you can have up to 8 minutes. After Shkia, I told you can have up to 8 minutes, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you have in the clock, it says calendar says Shkia is in this time. Now that's called astronomical sunset. Astronomical sunset means that if there was a lens at sea level looking towards the west, and as it's looking towards the west, the sun sinks beneath the horizon, approximately then that's astronomical Shkia. Fine. However, Halocho doesn't say you have to, put on a pair of swimming trunks and get into the water to see the Shkia. Halocho is you're walking on the promenade, or you're looking on the overcliff, whatever, and you see the Shkia. So therefore, the higher you are, the later the Shkia is. Yeah? If you're looking towards the west, if you're on the 10th floor, you're going to see the sun longer than if you are on the ground floor. And so this is the first point. The first point is that the Shkia in the calendar is from sea level, but the Shkia lahalocha is certainly not from sea level. It's from a little bit higher up, and that gives you a couple of minutes. On top of that, we have the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush to differentiate between Shkia Niris and Shkia Amitis, and he talks about Rosh Harim Agvoyim, that it's only if they be let's say if you were by Haifa, and the sun is setting on the west, and you're looking to the Mount Carmel, which overlooks the Mediterranean. And if you look towards the top of the mountain and you see that there's no longer rays of the sun, that is when it's Shkia Amitis. Or even then, the Har Carmel is not the tallest mountain. Alter Rebbe says, Horim Agvoyim Sheberetz Yisrael. So therefore, that gives us another few minutes. Now, I wouldn't normally be so liberal with Shkia for other inyonim, the inyonim which are chamurim ma'ed about Shkia, and for those things I wouldn't be so liberal. But here we're talking about eating before Havdalah. And there's a shita which says you can till Tzeiser Kachovim. So we can afford to be more easygoing, and that's why he said up till 8 minutes. So when you finish mincha, don't shove the guy next to you. You have another couple of minutes so you can relax if you're washing for Shalashudis. Okay. Now here I got the following question. This is from another country, and he's got a grocery store, some kind of, I don't know. He sells also incense. And a guy comes in and he says, I like to buy a good supply of incense. And Masiach Lefitumoi, he says, because we use it in the church and then we're having a service, and I need to provide, for the service. So am I allowed to? Now I want to clarify. Christianity is considered Avodah Zarah. You may have heard that Enochri Eine Mitzuva ala Shituf. That means that for the Goy, Trinity is not an Aveda. Shituf is if he believes in Hashem and something else, is not an Aveda. That doesn't change that the other worship, which he worships, is Avodah Zarah. Yeah. So if a Goy worships Hashem and he also worships an idol, see, well, he believes in both. He's allowed to do that, let's say. But the idol becomes a chefs of Avodah Zarah. So here, so the worship itself is Avodah Zarah. So are we allowed to assist them? Which I'm thinking twice whether my lomdus is correct. But meanwhile, what we have over here is a siman in Shulchan Aruch, siman Kuf Nun Aleph, which says that if a goy, as Mechaber says, if a goy says, I want to buy this product from you, I want to use it for worship, so you're not allowed to sell it to him. Comes along the Ramo, and he says, Yesh Oimrim, that which you're not allowed to provide them, the resources for their worship, is only when they have no alternative source to get those items. They don't have they don't have the supply, nor can they get it elsewhere. But if they can obtain the same goods elsewhere, then you are allowed to sell them the provisions for their worship. Yesh machmirim, there are those who are machmir, and the minig is lahokel, like the more lenient position. Bal nefesh should be machmir. So if you're Ashkenazi, so then you have basis lahokel, unless you're a Bal Nefesh, which you're going to be machmir for yourself. If you're a Sfardi, then you wouldn't be allowed to sell. Now, to explain a little bit more about this. Hamoishit kois yain le nozir. There's a nozir who made a vow not to, and nozir's not allowed to drink wine. And you're standing near him, and he says, do me a favor, there's a glass of wine there, I'm desperate for a glass of wine, could you pass the wine to me? And you pass it to him. So you have provided the nozir the wherewithal to violate a mitzvah. So in the Gemara, there's a whole discussion. This is only if it's treyivre dinar. If it's the nozir is on one side, the glass of wine is on the other side of the river, and he can't, for some reason he can't swim, whatever. So he asks you to pass it, but he can't reach it. But if it's within his reach, he just asks you a favor, but he could do it himself. That's not called lifnei iver. You're not over on enabling. You haven't enabled him to do that very because he was able to do it without you. It still is of Messiah bidvar avera. It's one level less. You're accomplice to some degree, but you're not over lifnei iver min haTorah. Here becomes the debate whether the is of Messiah bidvar avera applies to goyim also. And so the Mechaber is saying you're not allowed to sell it to them, because and the Ramo is saying if they can get it elsewhere, so then it's only on the level of Messiah, yeah? And therefore there are those who say Messiah is permitted to a goy, and those who are Machmir say that it's not permitted. And just why I was hesitating after my whole spiel about whether a goy has the issur of shituf, if he's allowed to do it, so why should there be issur lifnei iver altogether? All right, that's to just think about it more carefully. All right, but meanwhile, this remains simply: is he allowed to sell it or not? So there is an heterim to him to continue selling. Certainly, if the guy doesn't say anything, you're allowed to sell. And if you know he's for sure that he's going to use it for avodah zarah, for his worship, then bal nefesh yachmil atzma. And I've said many times, yachmil atzma means you paskin to be machmir for yourself. You don't paskin like that for other people. That's the lashon yachmil atzma. Unless the person's asking, you say, okay, fine. Seuda Shlishis asks you, then I think you should be telling them, okay, so here is in a fine Jewish home, and there's a jar of mustard. And yesterday, Mrs. dipped a halachic knife into the mustard. Today, the Mister wants to take some of the mustard with a milchik knife and put it together with some milchik food. And here's the question. I know generally we keep the mustard with a parav, but is that mustard now become? Does it become trafed up when you put in a milchik knife and a halachic knife in the mustard? That's really the question. So we have a concept of dover charif, and dover charif, sharp food, has got the power of, let's say, if you took a classic example, you took a halachic knife and you chopped an onion. Now, and then that onion becomes halachic. So when people ask me this question, when it becomes, now they fried it in a milchik frying pan, yeah? So now, the first question I ask, when you tell me it's a halachic knife, do you mean you've used this knife for cutting meat, hot meat, or is it just a vegetable knife you wash up in halachics? But if sometimes it is like they cut hot meat, yeah. If so, that knife is halachic. Now, the interesting thing is that whereas generally we say if it's more than 24 hours since the was used for meat, then you can be lenient. When it comes to dover charif, it's got a property of refreshing the taste. So that even if the knife wasn't used for a few days, if it had been used for hot meat, to cut, let's say to cut hot meat, then that knife is fleshik. The onion becomes fleshik, and if you took that onion and you used it in a milchike frying pan and you fried some whatever, so then that frying pan would now become treifed because it's got milchik and fleshik absorbed in it. Yeah, that's true. That's because you've got here a combination of two factors. You've got the onion, which is a tova charif, and you've got what's called duchke de sakina, the pressure, the friction of the knife. So those two factors combined. Hence our question here, you've got a mustard, which is in the form of a cream, of a paste, so you don't have the friction, you don't have the resistance. So does it become, when you dip a spoon or a knife into the mustard, does that make the mustard milchik or fleshik, etc.? So let's read. This is a contemporary sefer on kashrus, sefer ha-kashrus. Apparently in Eretz Yisrael, people who are going to train as mashgichim are told to familiarize themselves with this sefer. So simple, very, very simple language. Sharp foods should be kept in parva dishes because a food absorbs from the taste which is absorbed in the dish. And if you're going to put the sharp food in a meaty dish, so then you won't be able to use them, those dips with milky and so on. Then he says, ha'ora, a sharp food which was left in a milky or meaty dish for more than 18 minutes, and then it was put in the food of the other gender, then ask a shaila. So what he's saying in simple words is a simple dip of a milchike spoon or a milchike knife, a clean milchike knife, into the mustard does not make the mustard fleshik. If it stays there for 18 minutes, that's called the shiur reticha or something. If it's 18 minutes or more, then a dover charif there may be interchange of taste from the implement into the mustard. But if it's less than that, it's a simple short dip, it's not, and it's clean. So it's not recommended. Recommended is you have a par of a spoon for your mustard dip and so on, but b'diavad, if it has been a clean piece of cutlery was dipped in, it does not make the dip fleshik nor milchik. Just where, once it becomes Shabbos Mevorchim Adar, you realize that Pesach is around the corner also. In Hilchos Pesach, we have about a base seuda, a dish which is kept where you keep yeast in it. And because it's used for fermenting the yeast, so then that keli becomes chomod stick. No heat, but a strong product like yeast is going to impart a taste, and it's going to be very hard, even with boiling water. Boiling water will take out that which was absorbed in boiling water. But if the yeast absorbed or impregnated a chomod taste into that dish, hot water is not going to take it out. So if it will be a longer period, so the dover charif does impregnate a taste. But meanwhile, we're talking about a very, very short-term dip, then that would be okay. Right, let's move on. So I gave a shiur recently about Birchas Hamazon, and we only got till Mayim Achronim Zimun, and in some yeah, you're familiar. So that's not in all Ashkenaz Sidurim, only in certain, in the English ones, and probably in the Singer Siddur, probably has it there. I don't have a Singer Siddur at home. Please, I can find one. Don't worry. I'll manage. But meanwhile, so here's very interesting. And when else do you have Miyam Malal? At the end of, is it Anim's Miris? So there's a Miyam Malal over there. Now, so one of the Talmidos asked me about this Miyam Malal. So very interesting. In here you have from the Levush, and it's also the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that to say after Baruch She'oma, to say Miyam Malal Gvuras Hashem, Yashmiya Kol Tilosai, and then to proceed to say V'ich Psuke de Zimra, Toyim Gemurim Heim, absolutely misled. And if you say it, it's almost, he says, it's like heresy, because you're about to say Psukkah de Zimra, and you say Mi Yamal Gvuras Hashem, who can praise Hashem adequately? You know what? I'm going to do it now. I'm going to say now Psukkah de Zimra, and we're covered. We've praised Hashem adequately, and that is considered blasphemy, because who could say all the praises of Hashem? He quotes the famous line, Diyoy Ilayame. You recognize that, Diyoy Ilayame. That's from the Akdomus, yeah? If the seas had been like her ink, you wouldn't be able to describe the praise of Hashem adequately. Then this part the Alter Rebbe also brings, but the next part he does not bring. This is the Levush. He says, if it's at the end, you finish saying praises, and then you say Miyah Malel. So what you're saying is, I've said what I can. Miyah Malel, I can't say everything, but that's why I'm stopping here. That's okay. But to say it at the beginning and then to launch into praise is very presumptuous. So therefore, the fact that Miyah Malel is said after Anim Zmiros, that's it. You're parting. We've said Anim Zmiros. Miyah Malel, who can cover it totally? Okay, we'll stop here, but we can't do justice. That's justified. But to say Miyah Malel and then go and say in benching, it's clearly against. This is also Chuvas Marshal and the Levush, and it's brought in Mogen Avrom and Simonun Aleph. So I'm wondering, where does this come from? This minig to Messiah Miyah Malel before Birchas Hamazon seems to be Toyim Gemurim Heim. I don't think one should use that for an established minig Ashkenaz. I'm sure someone will find some justification, but I'm curious. So someone out there, if you find an explanation, please share it with us. Right, let's move on to number 9. That was number 9, wasn't it? That was number 8. Okay. Yes, so now number 9. This is a new insight to me. Someone asks, if you've just said Baruch She'omar and you hear Kaddish and you haven't started Mizmor Seuda, can you answer Omei Shmei Rabba, let's say? And he was thinking that it's something like when you make a bracha on an apple and you hear Kaddish before you bite into the apple. So it's a hefsek. So Baruch She'omar being like a bracha before Psukkah de Zimra, you can't be mafsik between the bracha Baruch She'omar and Psukkah de Zimra. So on the bracha of Baruch She'omar itself, this is also curiously, it's not in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Ba'omrim Baruch She'omar koidem Psukkah de Zimra. Im siyim Baruch She'omar koidem shesiyim hachazon. If you, as an individual, have finished the bracha Baruch She'omar, and the chazan finishes afterwards, oinu achrav omen, you'll answer omen to the chazan. It's not a problem of a hefsek, because you're saying the same thing. You said Baruch She'omar Melech Buhul Batish Bochis. Fully agree. That's not a problem. Right. But then, if it were not the omen for Baruch She'omar, if it were for some other thing, so then Mr. Brewer brings from Pri Megadim that he is concerned about it being like a birchas hamitzvus, and therefore not to have a hefsek between the bracha Baruch She'omar and the recital of the Psukkah de Zimra. But I must say that in the Alter Rebbe I don't see any clue to this, and even birchas krishma. Is birchas krishma like a birchas hamitzvus? So actually, in Chabad we are machmir on this, because when it comes to Beche B'Am Yisrael Be'avo, so we are machmir that the Chazan says the bracha finishes off quietly. It doesn't say Beche B'Am Yisrael Be'avo loud, because otherwise it would mean that the Tzibur answer Omen, and that would be constituted hefsek between Beche B'Am Yisrael Be'avo and Shema Yisrael. So although in birchas krishma we do not use the words Asheket Shon b'mitzvos v'tzivon likros as Hashema, but still it's seen as a birchas hamitzvos, not to allow a hefsek between those brachas and the recital of Shema. So according to that logic, the argument here of the Pri Megadim does have basis, that one should avoid, after having said Baruch She'omar, before you've launched into Psukkah de Zimra proper, perhaps the staka not to be mafsik to answer something else because of a chashash of hefsik between the bracha and the article of which you're making the bracha. Once you've launched into your middle of Sukkot Zimra, then the rules are different. So this whole thing was, for me, was a bit of a surprise. So you can look it up in Siman Nun Aleph, in Mishnah Brura, and in other malaktim. Right, let's move on to the next thing on our list, and that is about a swing hanging on a tree, from a tree. And this is in reference to Shabbos. Are you allowed to sit on this swing, enjoy the swing on Shabbos? So we have a simple halacha. We're not allowed to climb a tree, not allowed to sit on a tree. Even, let's say, if a tree stump or a tree is if it's more than 3 tefachim above the ground, sometimes you've got the roots have kind of risen above the ground, such as if it's more than 3 tefachim off the ground, you wouldn't be allowed to sit on those roots. Good. You're not allowed to mishtamish b'gdolei karka. Someone asked me, is it got to do with it has leaves or not? It's got nothing to do with it has leaves or not. It's a Issa D'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to directly use something which is growing from the ground. Then we've got stodin, the sides, or in other words, 1 step removed, and then we've got a level called tzidei stodin, 2 steps removed. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch, and he says a ladder which is leaning on the tree. You wouldn't be allowed to go up that ladder on Shabbos because it's tzidei ha'ilon. Now, however, if there is a peg which is driven into the tree, you would be allowed to lean the ladder on this peg which is attached to the tree, because the peg is tzadin. The halad is called tzidei tzadin. It goes on. If you have a peg on a tree and there's a basket hanging on the peg, so the peg is tzadin, the basket is tzidei tzadin. So then you're allowed to put stuff in the basket, take it out of the basket, but you wouldn't be allowed to take the basket off or hang it on, because that would be mishtad mishmitzadad. Okay, so now that's the halacha as it appears in Shulchan Aruch. And now a little bit. Here you can see on the screen, you've got these yellow straps, and they're fixed to the tree. And then at some stage here in the middle, the end of the yellow strap, there's a kind of a hook. And then you have the swing itself has got black straps, black cords, and they have a metal hook, and that metal hook locks into the loop which is hanging from the yellow straps, and that's how you enjoy the swing. So is that called, should we say the yellow straps is tzadin, and then the black straps or the hooks is tzidei tzadin? That's where you might have come from that angle to say it's okay. So the Piskei Teshuvos, well, we went through this actually about 4 years ago. I found it on my list, on the index. So he comes up with first of all, he says, when you've got something which made up of various components, you're not going to say, oh, there's a screw and there's a board and it's all considered one unit. When something is made up of several components, we see that all as one. So let's say the ladder, well, the rungs, they are into the uprights, and the screws which are connecting them to the uprights, or whatever, you don't do that. The whole ladder is considered a single unit. And same thing, the whole swing, l'chayre, although you can argue that this swing comes as separate pieces, but b'pashtus it's all one swing, and therefore that should not be okay. He also says another interesting observation. If you took a board and you screwed it into the tree, so the board is holding on the tree because of the screw, that doesn't make the wood tzidei tzadin. The same idea. The screw is tough, is just to hold the board to the tree. And then he says another thing. If you had, let's say, a board which is supported on the tree, and on that board there are hooks which have been screwed into that board, would you be allowed to hang your coat on the hooks which are on the board, which are attached to the tree. And he says, no, you're not allowed to. He calls them all tzidei. It's all what the hooks and the board are considered one unit. Then he goes on, if the board, then you hung a swing from it, then you'd be allowed to sit on the swing, provided the tree is a sturdy tree. So I don't know whether you recognize this. There's this very beautiful book, which has been around about 30 years, Mr. About the Lamates Melochas, and it's got all different activities going on, and are they allowed or not allowed? So here you have the hammock, which is hanging from hooks on the trees. So he says it's okay, and I think he's right, according to what we just read. It's the hook here is not part of the hammock, it's not part of the tree. And therefore, that's called sidodin. And then you take up the hammock, and so then that's okay. So that's interesting that the hammock and the hooks are considered separate units, whereas, according to our discussion, the swing and the yellow straps are seen as one unit. There is room to disagree, but I think that would be true because these straps have no other function other than for the swing, whereas these hooks are there. I mean, they could be used for other things also, and therefore I just see them as separate things. So in the hammock, it's called tzidit. The hammock itself is tzidit stodin, whereas in the swing, I think it's called stodin. Okay, now what do we have next on our list? Lefty tefillin. Now, see on the screen you have here a picture of a Rashi, sorry, a shelyad tefillin, and as you know, we have Hashem's name Shin Dalad Yud on the tefillin. We've got the Shin is on the sides of the Shalrosh, 3 heads, 4 heads. And then we have the Dalet is in the knot of the Shalrosh, and the Yud is in the knot of the Shelyad. So where I'm showing now with the cursor, that end piece of the knot is a shape of a Yud. Now, I did not find a left-handed Shelyad in a sefer. I just used my computer to flip the picture the other way around, and therefore the writing over there is mirror writing. Yeah. So now, when you have a lefty, and so that now with the lefty, so then the kesher of the tefillin is going to be on the left side of the box rather than on the right side. Now looking at the yud over here, it's actually not a yud, it's a mirror of a yud. So here becomes a serious question. How do you make the yud in a lefty tefillin? Do you make a mirror image? Does that count for the mitzvah of having a yud? Some say take that view. Others disagree, and they say no, it has to be a yud. That's not a yud. And as a result, you'll have to somehow put the ritzua not from what would be here right to left, but from left to right, and then it would be the pointy part of the ritzua. Instead of pointing away from the tefillin, it will actually be pointing up towards the tefillin, and it'll be a yud, albeit it may be in an upside down position, but that depends how you're looking at it. But it will be a yud, not a mirror of a yud. So this is a debate, and contemporary Sforim have this thing. And we have in the Gemara talks about the Dalet has to be visible to the outside. The Lashon of the Gemara, Noyehen Labar. When you look at the Dalet at the back of the tefillin, you should be able to recognize a Dalet. And so it follows that the same thing, the Yud should be visible, should be seen as a Yud. I asked once one of the prominent Lubavitcher Rabbonim about this, and he was okay to have a mirror Yud. I'm not very happy about it, because just like the Dalet has to be, as I said, has to be a visible Dalet, so the Yud should also be a visible Yud, and therefore I was more inclined the other way. But as I say, there are heavyweights in both directions. So what should we say? Whichever way you do is you've got whom to rely on. Right. About gartel for benching. So last week we had this discussion: should you wear gartel for benching? and I mentioned how it's such a choshev mitzvah, and if you need a gartel to pull your strength together, so after a heavy meal, you may need a gartel to wake you up to focus on your benching. Now, so I came across Hashgacha Protis after last week's shiur that Tovshin Chov Zayin, someone makes a note, when after Yom Kippur, during those years, the Rebbe would have the Yom Tov meals upstairs in the apartment of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And so Motzi Yom Kippur was also a Yom Tov Dika meal. And the Rebbe came to this Yom Tov Dika meal, Motzi Yom Kippur, with his siddur, without his gartel. Number one. Number two, it says in Sefer HaMinhagim that on Purim, the Rebbe would come in with his gartel for the meal, for Tis Yadayim and Moitza Birchas HaMozen, and for the Maimer. So the fact that it's pointed out it's done so for Purim, perhaps you can read from that lav dafka any other time. So we're still not clear on that. Whereas last week I was like more inclined to say one should do so, but now if I see that Rebbe wasn't always so particular, so okay, can be a bit relaxed on that. What else do we have here? Okay, so one of our listeners heard how it's described the holding of the Lechem Mishnah, holding the two loaves back to back. The two bases are connected to one another, and the Lashon of the Kisvei Arizal as if it's one loaf. So he shared with me, this is a book called Mizmer LeDavid. Now listen, amazing Hashgacha Pratis. This is a book written by someone called Rov Yitzchok Raskin, who lives in Montreal. So I sent him an email, and I didn't get a response. I happened then to get a phone call from someone from Montreal. And I say to him, by the way, do you know that this person, Rabbi Yarmish, in Montreal? He says, he happens to be my father-in-law. Unfortunately, he's not too well, which explained why I wasn't getting a response to my email. At any rate, so he had, because the Lashon of the Rebbe was to hold the Zoy Eitzel Zoy, to hold the two loaves next to one another. So he had understood, as you can see in this picture, to hold them side by side. And as I've said, very clear, in the Kisvei Arizal, it doesn't mean side by side in that sense. It's side by side is as opposed to one on top of the other. But in the side by side itself, it should be back to back. So that's how it's clear in the Kisvei Arizal. And as I said also, and it's written over here also, we could see by the Rebbe, by the Fabrengens, that he held the two chalas with the flat side of the two chalas is connected to one another. So just another Emshal Gebner Refuah Shleima, and he should be able to come back and tell us he's happy to have the chalas back to back. Okay, the last thing which I want to share with you is that a couple of weeks ago, or was it 3-4 weeks ago, we had a discussion about Tevilas Tehillim in snow. If you remember that discussion, can you tovel Tehillim in snow? And then I showed how the Ramor says how the Tevilas Tehillim in snow, about the Tehillim in snow, but the snow has to be packed. And I asked the Shaila, how do you tovel in packed snow? When the snow is loose, okay, you can sink into the snow. But if you've packed it, so then it's become solid, so you can't tovel anything. So I left that as a question. So now one of our listeners kindly sent me from this Oiz V'Hodor edition of the Shulchan Aruch, which has, I guess, notes from various forum. And he says like this: in the earlier source, it's talking about if you put in snow into a mikveh. Let's say the mikveh was short of the 40 saw, it was like 39 saw, and you put in snow, and now that raised the volume. So for that, it says that the snow has to be packed, and then it's justified to raise the volume. But it's not talking about tovel in the actual snow. Then on this very question, those who understood that it means that you have to actually pack the snow, how can you tovel in packed snow? He asked this Sefer Mikveh Yisrael asked this question. And he comes up, someone suggests the following. It doesn't mean you're toveling in the actual packed snow, but rather if you have a mikveh made of packed snow, of 40 saw of packed snow, then you could pour a bucket of water, and that bucket of water, that space where the water is sitting in the snow, that will be mechuber to the mikveh, and that you'll be able to tovel in that water. And that was his suggesting. If anyone, perhaps if they still got lots of snow out where you are, I think I mentioned last week or last time we talked about it. You collect a lot of snow, leave it to melt, and you'll be very disappointed to see how little water comes out from a whole bucket of snow. It's really a pittance of water. I'm curious if you take packed snow, if you take a bucket and pack it with snow, hard packed, and then you bring it to the house and it dissolves. I'm curious to know how much the volume of that packed snow will be, which is here it seems to be saying it's going to have this shiur of water. I'm curious whether that is actually the fact, or so someone in England we don't have the luxury of this amount of snow. I think in some parts of the world they're still enjoying this. So if someone would do me a favor and check that out, I'd be happy to share it with everyone what the results are. A good Woche, everyone, and have a wonderful week. And Mishnichnas Adam Arbim Simcha. So already from Shabbos Mevorchim, we can really start upping the Simcha, the Ikka, Simchas, Hageulah, with Mashiach Tzidkeinu, B'Korav Yomeinu Mamish.
Koyach, Kodl.